Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have a special guest with us. Her name is Sandy Doyle, and she's the author of the book My Life at the Cemetery. It's Not as Dead as You Think. Sandy's worked in the funeral home industry for many years and has witnessed many aspects of the end of life journey from a perspective that most of us don't get to see. So, without further ado, I just want to welcome Sandy onto the podcast. Sandy, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. I'm looking forward to our talk.
Well, likewise, and I had a great time talking to you in the pre-interview process, and you shared quite a few things about when your husband passed that I thought was very unique. So I'm excited for you to share that. But you had
Okay.
this unique perspective of working in the funeral home industry, where most of us don't ever really come to you unless we're at that place where somebody's passed in our life, or maybe we're doing funeral planning for ourselves. And so
Right.
I'm excited to talk to you because it's a side of industry and life that we just don't really talk about that much.
Uh, People don't, and most people think, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't work there. And some people can't work there. I mean, we had a gentleman that had been there for just a little over a year, and he came in one day and he said, I can't do this anymore. Is the owner around? And I said, yeah. He said, would you get him? And I went and got him, and evidently he was in the process of, they were digging the grave for a baby, and he said,
Oh,
I can't do that. I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to do it. Like, all I do is have nightmares when I go home. I can't do that. So it is people, everybody can't do it. Let's just put it that way. But I found that, I think my spirit, basically my grace of God, the divine spark of the divine that was in me, uh, I came to view it. It was a mission. And
mm,
for every time that I witnessed a burial, I would always say, uh, grant unto them, O Lord, perpetual light, and may they have mercy, or something along that line. And please pray for those loved ones that will miss them. And that was, I think that helped get me through a lot of them. A lot of the burials were very tragic, accidents and things like that. And that helped me get through that. And now, after writing this book, and I went through a program with Mary Morrissey on brave thinking, and she had made the comment that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. Anyway, I got to thinking about it when I was writing the book, and coming to the realization when my husband passed away. He appeared to me a couple, 3 times, and I had heard that, all through my journey at the cemetery. And I thought, yes, we are spiritual beings, because that spirit never dies. That spirit never dies. And if you believe in God or a higher being, you have to realize that you're part of him, and there's a little bit of him inside of you, and that spirit's not going to die. And so that's how I came to the realization. Yes, that is so true. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And after that, it just seemed like death is part of life. We're all born, we're all going to die. It may be a day, it may be 100 years, but we're all going to die. And that doesn't mean it's going to be the end of us. And I can't tell you what journey we have after we pass, but it's not death. It's not the just laying there in a casket for eternity. It's not that. You're not there. The spirit that was inside you is gone on with the grace of God or with the universe, however you want to think about it, or however you believe, whatever your religion or your belief is, that you're a spiritual being and you are here to experience and you're here to learn and you're here to give. And love abounds. Love abounds. If God loves you enough to put you here on this earth, he's going to love you enough to take care of you after you're gone.
That's very powerful, Sandy, because I've had similar experiences when I lost my grandfather and when I lost my own child. I saw them in premonitions in my dreams I had, and it only happened 30 days after they passed. I haven't
Right.
seen them since. And long story short, I really do, on my journey of walk of life, I do believe what you said about that. I think there's just so much more to this life we're living than we even know about. And
So
I don't think those premonitions or our past ones appearing to us are by fluke or by accident. I don't feel like it's that because it comes from such a deeper place. In my words, compassion and empathy and love, deep, deep inside you is really where that comes from. And I think
exactly.
you couldn't have said it better. Spiritual beings having a human experience. I think that's a very great way to summate that. Um, I wanted
And
to
it
ask.
just
Oh,
it just made life, the death of my husband and me looking back, it just made everything made sense to me after that. You know, um, I'm a spiritual being. I even got to the point that I could accept myself more and love myself more, realizing that I am a spiritual being, than ever before. So, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a powerful question because I don't know a lot about the funeral side of things in that industry. And most people go to their jobs every day, and most of us work an average job. Whether that's in the office or we're doing something manual labor, that kind of thing. Working in a funeral home has got to be a radically different experience from most of those jobs where it's kind of the same task every day. Have you found that? When you go to work every day, I know a lot of people will say, well, every situation's different at my job, but I feel like in your industry, that's got to be taken to a whole new level.
And it's true. I never knew what was going to walk through the door, whether that was a family just to do up their final things together, or whether that was somebody that just had lost somebody and the grief was so real that they didn't even know that they were talking to me. Um, and days later, they would come back and say, "How did all that happen?" They didn't even remember me, didn't remember any of it. So, but yeah, I had to have sheriff come out to break up a family. I had to have a sheriff come out to make sure the ex family didn't come to the funeral. I had to have the sheriff come out to make sure that there was like brothers that were fighting, and had to make sure that there was nothing going on. That they got out of the cemetery and the funeral home without any incidents as far as the cemetery grounds and went. So and you just never knew. I mean, most people at that time were very gracious and had no clue what to do or was looking for somebody to help them. But others had a chip on their shoulders and was so very, you were relieved. You could feel. I had two, and I talk about one of them in my book. He came in and he was so like cold. Everything was just so um, it just felt, I can't even tell you, bleak. I guess would be the word that I would use. And he said, I want to buy a mausoleum crypt, and I want it on the south side, or I want it where the sun shines, and I want it up high because that's going to be as close to heaven as I'll ever get. And
Wow.
I went and to see what we had because the mausoleums were kind of scarce back then. And sure enough, there was one, and he said, I'll take it. And he handed me cash, handed me $7,000 in cash, and said, I will take it because I know I'm never going to get to heaven, but I want to be able to see the sunshine once in a while. And I thought, and I looked at his eyes, and they were just like a steel gray. And I thought, I wonder what story was behind those eyes that he could not figure that there was mercy in his creator. So,
That's that's an incredible story. I That's what I think is fascinating about the job that you do is, everybody that comes to the cemetery has a story of some kind, and it's not always, as you eloquently shared today, it's not always this loving, peaceful story that everything
mm-mm,
worked out the way everyone planned it to be. There's a lot of grief, there's a lot of love, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, there's
yeah,
a lot of greed, a lot of different emotions flying around in a very high capacity. Um,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what is that like in that environment? You mentioned that you don't always get to know what walks in the door at this job, but how do you prepare yourself to deal with an array of personalities like that?
You pray a lot. Or I did. It was, and you could always talk to your, we had a great manager, and there was a good team. And then if something was really, really going on or really troubling us or whatever, we would talk about it, or else we would pray about it. It was just, well, you had to, you know. And it helped when I first went to work there. There was an elderly gentleman, and he was a minister. And he said, he came back in, and it was rainy and cold. He came back in. It was like my second week there. And he said, I planted another one for the good Lord today. And I said, what? He said, I planted another one for the good Lord today. And I thought, I said, what are you talking about? And he he told me the story of how, he didn't believe in God. Um, and then his wife, who was in her early 40s, had a massive heart attack. And he said it damaged over half of her heart. And the doctors said, she would have to go home. She might have a day, and she might have a year, but they didn't think that she'd live much longer than that. And so he said she went home and she stayed in bed that first day. And every day after that, she was up at 5 o'clock and she was reading the Bible. And he said, I told her she needed to rest, and she said, I'm resting in the Word of God. What he says about healing, I'm saying it right back to him because there's a power in words. And he said that had been 20 years ago. And he said, through watching her, knowing that her heart was not capable of, it could have gone out anytime. And he said, but I watched her. She stayed around until our son was grown. She got to see her grandkids. But every morning at 5 o'clock, she gets up and she reads the Bible, and then she quotes those scriptures right back to God. And
Yeah.
he said, I became a minister. He said, because to watch that much faith and feel that much love that she had for her maker and for me and our son, I had to become a minister and share that. He said, I don't view this as death. I view it, I just planted another one for the good Lord today. So,
That's an incredible perspective of that.
yeah.
I've heard a lot of these stories where people, lack faith or don't even have it. And it's always in these moments of a big traumatic event
Yeah,
where that comes out. And I think it's very powerful, by the way, how it comes out. It's not like somebody just picked up a Bible and decided that day they're going to believe in the Lord. I think it's something that always feels like, you can call it spirit, the divine, you can call it God if you want, whichever way your belief system is. But I feel like it always comes through an event a certain way for you to receive the message.
right. Yeah, I think that we're all here to experience things, and we're all here to learn things. And everything that we experience, if you're open to it, is going to draw you closer to your maker, to your creator. Um, I basically, most of the time, I call it the spark of the divine, the little bitty spark that's in me, you know. And but yeah, you have to have some kind of faith in order to work in a cemetery or a funeral home. Even paramedics, some of the things that they see and do. And I tell people, you've got stories, write them down. Write them down, because there's lessons there for all of the rest of us. You know, every life has a story.
What's been one of your most, I know you've got a lot of stories because you wrote a book, but I'm really curious, was there, one or two things that happened over the course of your time working at the cemetery that really moved you or shaped your beliefs in a certain way?
I can tell you the first story that's in my book, and people will laugh and they all say, there's no feasible way that could happen. But yeah, it did. And I remember I, after all of that happened, I said, one of these days I'm going to write a book, because nobody's going to believe it. And I'm going to title it Days of Our Lives at the Cemetery. and everybody in the office would laugh at me. But the story was a 49-year-old guy who had a massive heart attack, and his 16-year-old daughter and his 21-year-old son and the ex-wife, their mother, came in to make arrangements. And we made arrangements, and buried him right next to his mother. And there was like 3 other spaces around. And so I just put it kind of on hold to see if the ex-wife wanted, all of them or one of them or whatever. So about 2 weeks later, because I always tried to call my people to see if they had any questions, if there was anything I could improve on, or if there was anything the cemetery could improve on, or the funeral home, or whatever, how we could do a better job. And I called her to see how things were going, and she said the 16-year-old wasn't doing good, but the boy had went back into the service. He was at basic training when that happened. And she said, I want to buy the space right next to him, because if something happens to one of the kids, I want to put them there. Or if something happens to me, the kids are going to want me there. And I said, okay, I'll write up the contract and come out tomorrow and take care of that. And she said, okay. So she came out. About a week later, had a young girl. I mean, she looked like a model. She was gorgeous. And she came out and she said, I want to buy a space as close to this guy as I can get, because we have been lovers for about 10 years. And she said, I know he would want to spend eternity with me. So I need to be as close to him as I can get. So I ended up selling her the space at his feet, so it'd be him, his ex-wife, and then his girlfriend. So I'm shaking my head in disbelief. And then a few days later, a nice looking middle-aged guy comes in and he said, "Can I talk to you privately?" And I said, "Yes." And so we went into the arrangement room and he said, "I want to buy a space as close to," this guy's name was Jerry, "as I can get, because we have been lovers since high school. And I know that he would want to spend uh, eternity with me. And so it's important that I am as close to him as I can get." There was no other spaces completely around, but I sold him the space at the bottom of the ex-wife next to the girlfriend. And I said, "Isn't it fitting that Jerry was buried in the garden of love, and the family may never know, but the cemetery knows it all."
That, that
So people, they always laugh at that. And I put that story at the first of the book because that's probably one of the first, it was one of the first stories that happened that I really remembered. And I never did forget it because I kept saying, "Okay, Sandy, you have lived a sheltered life." And I had at that time, I'm thinking, this stuff doesn't happen. This stuff doesn't happen. And then I thought, one of these days I'm going to write a book. One of these days I'm going to write a book. And then things happened. And after the death of my husband, I sold my home and I moved in with my son. They had bought a large house and I moved in and upstairs, and I was diagnosed with lung cancer and second stage COPD, even though I had never smoked a day in my life. And so I COVID hit, and my kids said, "You're not going out. You're not leaving the place." I mean, when you got 7 kids, it's kind of hard. If you got one, you can usually fight them and overrun it. Maybe two you can do. 7, you can't. It gets tiring. Anyway, so I thought, what am I going to do? So I dug out the notes and the stuff that I had put, some of the obits that I had kept, and some of the families that I'd gotten close to. And so that's how the book came.
That's, Sandy, I have to admit that that's a wild story that you would see on some kind of TV show,
Yeah,
drama movie, something like that. I mean, I would never in a million years suspect something like that. And
no, never.
I mean, if I was in your position working there, I'd be sitting there in my head going, do they know each other? Like, I mean, how did this even, I mean, I'm gonna say to Jerry, I applaud you for keeping that all a secret till you died. I mean, that's impressive in a lot of
But
ways.
didn't you, but wouldn't you think, well, he was 49 and he had a massive heart attack. He must have been getting tired.
That's what I was wondering.
Oh, anyway, yeah.
Um, so Sandy, I wanted to ask you, so I do talk a lot about grief on the podcast. When you're working in a funeral home and doing, either being there for graveside services or even, I forget what we call them at the end of things, but family get-togethers is where I'm going to put that for lack of words. What do you see people when they're grieving? What do you see them go through in those experiences?
What people do not understand, I think, is that grief takes many forms. Um, a lot of it can be guilt. Um, if I'd have done this, or if I'd have done that, or it might have made a difference, or it's my fault that they're going, or just different things like that. Um, Guilt, I think, is probably one of the biggest things that people go through, and then the absence of that loved one. Um, in my case, my husband and I were married just over 50 years. And I found myself even though I knew all the signs and I had worked with people with grief before, even before grief counseling had really came out a lot. Um, Most people back in the earlier part of my life, they would just say, "Oh, it's just grief, get over it." And there's no getting over love. Love is there, period, point blank. God loves you. You love each other. You love other people. You love your children. You love your parents, your grandparents. You don't get over things just because they have died and they're absent from your life. You still, you still love them. You still wish that you could have that conversation with them. And so, absence, I think, really, um, you feel lonely. You feel like if you could just have 10 minutes with them, if they could just tell you what you should do. Um, and there is a lot of people. I mean, one of the reasons I ended up with a spiritual being having a human experience was I had my husband come back and tap me on the shoulder or, shake me awake and me opening my eyes and him just standing there. And what I couldn't understand, Chris, is that I buried him in a white golf polo shirt and black jeans because he loved golf and that was his thing. When he come back to me, he's standing there in a black suit, white shirt, and red tie. And I kept thinking, how did he get in those clothes? You know, it just bothered my mind. Why, how did he change clothes? You know, but you realize that that's how you know that they're your spiritual being, and they're going to come back as long as they love you or they think that you need them or they want to and let you know that they're okay. And so, and it's, yeah, it's just, I think the loneliness, the guilt, and then the grief of just being sad because it's bad enough if you live in a place that in wintertime is gray and dreary and cold and you're trying to get over the passing of a loved one. The sunshine and Mother Nature helps tremendously. I mean, I find that, like in the spring and summer and fall, I can walk out here in the woods and it makes a big difference. You and Mother Nature, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. That that's and those people that don't get over grief. There's people, and I think I have 3 stories, maybe 4 stories in my book that I talk about. One one gentleman basically his 16-year-old daughter shot herself over a boyfriend, and she had gotten into his gun cabinet and had shot herself. And he would he drank himself to death, and the the death certificate said, alcohol poisoning, but grief, guilt, that's what did it. He couldn't handle the life without, and then the memories and the guilt that he felt. He couldn't go on living.
I think
So
that's one of the hardest things I've seen people go through when I'm coaching people or I run into people in Facebook groups. And I'm part of the lost parent community, and I always say it's a club that I hope nobody ever belongs to because it's not a great place. I'll say that. But I got asked one day because somebody said something insensitive to me about that being that way and not getting over my grief or getting stuck in it. And something I had told them that I came across talking to multiple parents is that when we lose a grandparent or even a parent at that point. We've had a lot of years with them, decades with them. And so there's always this, I'm able to look back and think of fun memories or funny. My grandfather was a smart ass, so he had a lot of funny sayings over life. And he gave me a hard time growing up, but when I look back, I've got a lot of memories with that, even though I watched him pass away right in front of me. I have a lot of good memories to look back on. So that one, I was able to move through that grief pretty well. When I lost my son to stillbirth, that one really broke me because I only had less than 24 hours with him, and that was so I've always tried to explain to people, I think that in some instances, when loss is very sudden or very dramatic loss or something very significant happens in that loss, it makes it very hard to move through that grief because you do get caught in that place of, what if, or I could have done this, or I should have done that, or, I wonder if this happened, they might still be here. You get caught in that grief loop a lot in those situations. And I think that's why um, I'll share one of the blessings that came out of losing my son. I'm a very much more compassionate, empathetic person, and now that I've seen loss at the first stage of life before you even set foot into the world, and I've seen it at 89 years old. I've seen death on both spectrums, and I can say that in some ways, certain losses are harder than others. It's hard. It's hard to even say that too, by the way, because I do feel that everybody's grief journey is very different and very personal, very individual. And I personally don't think there's a right or wrong way to grieve. I don't think there's a 12-step process to do it. I just don't believe in those things. Um,
And basically what people don't understand is, like with grief, it was like, oh, I don't know, my husband had been gone 3 years or so, a little over 3 years, and all of a sudden it was just like I just burst into tears, and I couldn't understand what was going on. Didn't dawn on me that it was his birthday.
mm,
And I evidently I knew it, but I didn't realize it. And I just burst into tears, and I couldn't understand why. But you're right. People, it's something, the loss, you don't get over that easy if you love. And basically, it's still an experience that you had to go through, that I had to go through, and everybody out there that has loved and has lost had to go through for some reason. Doesn't make us a better person, makes us more loving, makes us more empathetic, makes us a better person because you can say, I've loved and I have lost, and I know what love is.
that's really well said, Sandy, because that's how I feel. Both the losses I went through were very, very hard, and I've tried to share that with everybody that I can that goes through that. That when I've watched people. I've had a lot of funerals in my family growing up, and some of them I've watched people get over really fast. I have people in my family I'll keep anonymous for whatever reason, but I can tell don't really walk through grief. I can tell they bottle it all up, they hold it inside, they try to walk and put a face on like everything's fine. And you can look in their eyes and see they're dying inside. You can see it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think
Or
grief
that
is one
they
of
died.
those.
Some of them had died at the time that that person died, and they just have not. The heart just hasn't stopped. But there's a story, the one that probably affected me more than anything else, I guess, was a gentleman had came in with his two sons and to make arrangements for his wife who had suffered 5 years with cancer. And he ordered this, nice white casket with all pink interior, and got a pink nightgown for her with little roses in it. And he had gone down, had all the songs where Elvis was her favorite, and all the gospel songs he wanted played, what he wanted the minister to say, who the minister was supposed to be, had everything. He had a list, and he had wrote everything down. And when we got done and I gave him the price, he said, "Well, let's just do up mine while I'm here." And the funeral director said, "What?" He said, we can't, we can wait, we can do it after the funeral, we can get everything taken care of." "No, no, no, I just want to write run check." Said, "I don't want a pink casket though, but I want a blue one, but the music can stay the same. Don't want any flowers on the casket." He said, "I put my American flag on it. Don't want any of that." Okay. He wrote the check out for both funerals, came to, stood up and he said, "I got just enough money left in my checking account to take my boys and their families out for supper tonight." And put his arm around them and left, thought he was doing fine. Get the call the next morning to come and pick him up. He shot himself that night after he got back from taking his sons out for dinner that night.
Wow, that's sad.
And
Wow.
I've always wondered about the boys, how they, you watch the mother suffer for 5 years, you know, and then he had to have it planned. I mean, because I kept thinking, was there something I could have said different, or was there something the funeral guy could have said different, or the director could have said any different? But no, he had a list, and everything he checked off on that list.
Wow,
He
that
wasn't
Sandy,
going to live. He
that's
just wasn't going to live
tragic.
that. That is tragic. That is tragic, and that is part of grief. He could not live without her, or he didn't think he could.
I found today listening to your stories and hearing about your experiences in the funeral home. I've found that there's such a deeper meaning to life and a deeper purpose to why we're here
Yes,
after listening to you. And I feel like we live our lives in such a very reactive state nowadays. With driving to work, going home, doing this, doing that. We're always rat racing all the time. And I think I've just had a much deeper appreciation for this journey of life that we're on because of the stories you've shared today. And I think that
thank you.
when we take time to slow down a little bit and appreciate what we have, and really put some meaning and some purpose behind our lives beyond what our autopilot that we live on every day.
Oh
I
yeah,
think you shine light on that today.
I hope so. I hope so. And if it helps one person out there, then it's all been worth it. All been worth it. Just love, love whoever's in your life, and go on and love nature, and be grateful. Be grateful for the experience that you've had, the people that have been in your life, and the people that are going to be in your life. Just be grateful because they're there for a reason. I don't know what it is, but they're there for a reason. And if it's to make you love more or experience more love, then it's all worth it.
I appreciate you sharing that because somebody told me a very long time ago, it was somebody religious, told me that God will always put people on your path for a reason. You don't meet people coincidentally or by accident. That doesn't happen. But you always have people that come into your life, whether that's to show you something, teach you something, or even give you something at that point. People always come our way to teach us and show us something that we just don't see on our own. So I appreciate what you just said there.
Yeah, that they do. I do believe that. Yeah, and I guess basically I like watching people, and I like listening to their stories, because as I said before, every story basically has a reason and a purpose, and every life has a reason and a purpose. And you just have to marvel at life and be thankful for every breath you take. Yeah, every breath you take, be thankful because somebody didn't wake up today.
That's the honest truth of life right there. I,
Mm-mm.
Sandy, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast this morning, sharing your
Thanks.
experiences working in the funeral home, sharing with us a little bit about your book, and just your perspective that you gained through this walk of life, working in an industry that I know is not the easiest by any stretch of means, and
Yeah.
takes a lot for you to work there. So I really appreciate you sharing what you did today.
It basically working, it was one of the best blessings that I ever received, I do believe, outside of my husband and children. But to work there and to bring some bit of comfort sometimes to somebody, to pray over them when they die or whatever. Um, it was a very big blessing for me. And I hope that all of the people that work in the death care industry, whether it's at the cemetery, whether it's the funeral home, or whatever they do, basically, just be thankful and bless the people that you have to encounter every day.
Well, Sandy, as we wrap up the show, I usually ask my guests two questions at the very end. One of them I'm going to ask you, and I think you answered it a little bit ago, but I want to just make sure we get it at the end here. What is one thing you would share with somebody who is going through grief or maybe feels stuck in grief that could help them move through that just a little bit easier?
Uh, Two things. One would be get counseling. It does help. The other is to learn to walk, especially in nature, learn to be grateful, go back in time and be grateful for uh, this day or that day or something that that person said or that they were in your life or whatever. Just be grateful. And when new people come in your life, be grateful because you have been blessed. You know, if that person came in your life and they were only there, you know, for a few hours, or they were only there for 50 or 60 years, you've been blessed. They didn't have to do that. God didn't have to send them to you. So they came to you for a reason. Just be grateful. And I think that the more grateful that we are about life and about death and about the people in our lives, the better we will be and the better that life all around us will be.
That's beautifully said. You shared a bit of advice my grandfather said to me a lot growing up, and I've come to appreciate it as I've gotten older in my life because I didn't fully understand it when I was younger. But there's a lot of depth to what you said about being grateful in life, and that's something that my grandfather grew up in the Depression during the Dust Bowl in the 30s, and that's a story for another day. But he always talked about being grateful for what's in front of you and people that you meet. He was very big about that. So I wanted to say thank you for sharing that bit of advice and reminding myself and reminding listeners today to have that perspective. I think that's a beautiful outlook.
Yeah, I think
So,
so.
and I wanted,
And
I
what's
wanted to, oh, I wanted to ask you too, by the way, if people want to get a copy of your book or find you and connect with you, how can they do that?
It's on Sandy Doyle dash author on is my website. The book is on Amazon. The book is on Barnes and Noble and Books a Million and Thrift Books. Um, or they can probably find me on Facebook. Everybody seems to find me on Facebook. But yeah, and I've had people say that, oh, well, I wouldn't want to read that book. But I don't have anybody that said that they wish they hadn't after they read it. The biggest blessing I got with this book is a gentleman. He knew me and he knew, or his wife and I were friends, and he was 90 years old and he lost his eyesight and he couldn't read anymore. And so every evening after they ate supper, he would have her read a story out of my book because they're all just little bitty events that happened that day. And so she said he would laugh and he would cry and he'd say, "She told it like it is. I am just so, so glad that she wrote this book and that I got to hear the stories. So that was the biggest blessing I've ever done for the book.
That's beautiful, Sandy. You helped somebody that couldn't read. You've helped
Couldn't read.
somebody like that. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, biggest
Yeah.
blessing. And he got to read, or he got to hear all the stories, and so I felt very blessed for that. So
Well,
yeah,
I think you've done some beautiful work in your life, and I think had that not all happened, we wouldn't be here talking today. We wouldn't have
yeah,
met.
we wouldn't have the good and the bad. We wouldn't have had
Yeah.
it.
Well, Sandy, I just want to say a big thank you for coming on today's podcast and sharing your story and your experience. I know that this is going to help people more than we're ever going to know about, by the way. So
I
I'm
hope
just very grateful to you.
I hope so. I hope so. And if you ever have any questions or you need somebody to come back and talk right quick or whatever, just let me know.
Will do.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Sandy and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Sandy's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can also find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.